All right, can everybody see the screen?
Sure
Perfect.
can.
All right, so tonight, Sheena and I are going to be talking about the study portion primarily. However, it's still the whole quality improvement cycle. And by the end of this session, you will have learned how to use the rapid cycle testing, which is kind of fun, I think, actually. You'll notice that there's some questions here, so you'll be able to answer those, kind of keep those in your mind as you're going through. You know, did you see a result? How much or how little? Was the action worth the investment? Do you see trends? And were there any unintended side effects? So the PDSA cycle is plan, do, study, act, repeat. And you do that until you get your intended positive results, unless you decide to abandon, which we'll talk about a little bit here in just a few slides. So the first two parts, plan and do. Plan, you want to make sure that you're really looking at what you want to change, and kind of plan that out. How you're going to collect data, what do you predict happening? Look at big picture, how is it going to impact things? The big thing is just planning it out. That probably takes most of the action, really making sure that you know the different components you want to implement and making sure that what you do have planned out as a change is actually aimed at improvement. And then you want to move into do. I think that's self-explanatory. I was trying to think of a way to explain that, but I don't have it. You carry it out. You can start with a small scale, document everything, record all your data. That's probably in that portion the most difficult part, making sure that you're documenting all your observations and recording your data. That data is what's going to help you in the next section, and it's going to help you to determine whether or not you want to keep what you're doing, change it, and things like that. So that part is really important. Study, you will look at all of that data that you collected, all the observations that you had, kind of pick apart what's working, what's not working, and then look at what did we learn? Did this kind of target what we were wanting it to target? What else did it target? Were there any unintended consequences? Did we see that it did something completely different? And look at maybe why, what led to that targeting something different, or what led to those unintended consequences. And then act. And that's where you're going to, you can either adopt the change, abandon the change, or adapt the change and run another cycle. And then you continue on doing that until you get those positive outcomes that you are wanting. And I'm going to hand it over to Sheena to go through the model for improvement and the remainder.
Will you switch the slides for me? Okay, so
one thing I was going to jump in when Olivia was talking about data. Data is so important. You will hear me say that 100 times, but that is a big thing for in study, is that you have to have data or you can't study it. So data is important. I'll talk about that in a slide in a minute, but so this just kind of shows you the cycle in a different model. So model for improvement, plan, do, study, act, just kind of giving you a different way to look at it. Jay and Stacy, I think, are going to go more in detail on the ACT portion in a couple weeks. But as far as study, what are we trying to accomplish? That's like the main thing. Like, and we'll look at the data for that. How will we know that we're either improving or it's not working at all? And what change can we make that will result in improvement? So those are kind of like your big things that you look at and looking at data. Okay, Olivia, you want to go to the next slide? So we're going to look at an example that we developed on our end when we did QI. When we were taught by the NIATEX Foundation, we went through the PDSA cycle. We went through the nominal group technique. We did all of these things to work on quality improvement ourselves. And we're still doing it. We're still doing PDSAs and rapid cycles. We just did one last week. So, Olivia, you want to go to the next slide? So kind of looking at our example. So our goal, like our plan for our goal, we wanted to improve patient retention. And we wanted to do that around 30 days, which would be around the third, fourth appointment. So we decided to implement an orientation group, which was going to be after their intake, but before they move to a weekly group, to really start engaging them a little more, learning their barriers, teaching them a little bit more about the policies and procedures, helping them if they didn't know how to get on Zoom, or if they were struggling with transportation, like working out all of those barriers before they actually started in their weekly group treatment. We're a little more flexible with them and things like that, trying to really not set them up for failure at the very beginning, to set them up for success. So then we were working on measuring retention rates before and during the implementation. What did we do though? We implemented the orientation group. So the big thing, what we're really talking about today, is study. So data is important. So you can't study it if you don't have any data. So we had to go back and look at baseline data. So we had to pull all of the data from, which we just started with 3 months prior to implementing the orientation group. And then we started looking at current data as live as possible, because live data is hard to capture. So, and the length of the study time depends on how detailed or how complex your actual implementation, whatever your intervention is. Like if it's something fairly simple, it might not, you could probably do a quick study in a couple weeks, but our orientation group was quite complex. So but we were looking at the data, and to begin with, we just looked at like 4 weeks of data, a month's worth of data, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is working out great. We are doing an awesome job. Retention rates are going up. And then we realized we needed to look at it for a couple more weeks. And then we realized, oh, once they're hitting that third, fourth appointment and we're getting more people into that third, fourth appointment, it's not going down, but it's not really going up. It's just being consistent. So what is there has to be something that we can add change, but we really realize that the study is really important, because if you just do it for a short amount of time, we thought, oh, we were great, just keep on chugging along. But really, in the long term, we really weren't. We were just keeping it the same as it was before. So that's when we continued on with the PDSA and then changed it to something else. But until we knew within our study and all of our data, we wouldn't have known that. So we had to keep looking at the data. So we keep continuing to look at the data every week. Sometimes I'm like, okay, here we go again. But and some days I'm like, I don't want to show this to Katie, but that's the main thing. You got to study it. It might be something that's very simple that you're doing, and it won't take a lot of hard data to look at, but sometimes it'll be, you really have to invest in it and really look for a long time before you're able to move on to that ACT part, which we did have to adapt it because we learned that it wasn't making any change. And so we changed some things, and now we're in that next cycle of, is it working or is it not? And then what are we going to do if this isn't working? So it's a constant cycle, constantly evolving. And the main thing is you have to have data to support that. And any questions about that? Any comments from our team at all?
You know, one thing that our team helped to reframe for me, I know Mark helped reframe for me, is the data that we are specifically looking at retention, and it hasn't changed things. I think if we had done a survey for the staff pre-orientation group and during/post-orientation group, the feedback from staff would be that they find it helpful, that they find weekly groups run a little bit differently for them, and that they're spending less time kind of going over policies and procedures with patients. So, you know, the sort of all or nothing part of me, as we've been doing this QI, I've been thinking, oh, it's not working. It's sort of it's a waste. We wasted a project, and people have really helped me go, well, A, it's not a waste because everything about QI, all data is really helpful. It's informative. And B, from the staff side of things, it's been helpful. And, you know, when we talk about not just talking about retention for patients, but also retention for staff. So if staff feels like it's being efficient, then that's helpful to know.
And that point, Katie, goes back to one of the questions that Olivia mentioned at the beginning of, were there any unintended like side effects from it? And that is, we at the beginning, we didn't even think about talking to staff or what if staff would hate it or whatever. We were just like, we're doing this, you know, but in QI, we have talked about, you have to have buy-in from top and bottom. And so we really did in the long run talk about that. We got the buy-in from everybody before we did it, but we didn't really, what you said, like we didn't do surveys pre and post to see the effects on the actual staff. And that's something that was unintended, I guess. And then we realized, oh, well, the clinical side of things, the clinicians are seeing a positive impact, even though we're not seeing it in the data. It's still making a difference. So I think we're about ready to go into breakout rooms if nobody has any other study related questions for me or Olivia. Olivia, you want to go to the next one? Okay. So I think our goal for the breakout room is to kind of go over the beginning three. I mean, I know we talked last time about a PDSA cycle. in their breakout rooms and kind of started talking about the plan do. And now maybe more on the study of what you would, what data you would look at and things like that. Jay, was there anything else that we wanted to actually talk about in the breakout rooms today?
Excuse me. Well, first of all, great job, Olivia and Sheena. Thank you so much. The slides were definitely a little different than they have been in the other in the other sessions, which is good.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm gonna come to you now with I need that again for slides, but I think everybody should have received a Word document this morning that was what they call a project charter. And we received this from the NIATEX group that we talked about that trained us in QI. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I just want to go over it before we get in the breakout rooms, because I'm hoping what we can do is kill a couple birds with one stone here. Because at the end, if you remember at the last session, we're asking Cabin Creek and New River to present on their project that they're thinking about doing, right? This charter is basically what we're going to follow for those presentations. So hopefully we can start thinking about it and talking about it now. Less work when we get closer to that session. So let me share my screen real quick so I can show it to you, because I'm not sure we'll be able to do this in the breakout rooms. Like I might be able to share it in the breakout room that I'm in, but I don't know if it'll translate over to the other one. So let's do this first. Everybody able to see that? Okay. Okay, so a lot of this, it's a 2-page document, but a lot of this has been already talked about, right? So we're talking about, what are you trying to change? What's the, the problem that you've identified, right? Who's on your change team? What's the population, is it patients? Is it, patients in your MAT programs? You can get as specific as you need to, but you can see a lot of this has been talked about and should be able to be easy to fill out at this point. Where it might be a little bit more challenging is starting to think about the specifics around data. And so how you're going to collect it, who's going to collect it, all those things. And so those kind of last couple of questions here probably need a little bit more discussion. So we can definitely talk about that in the breakout rooms if we need to. But then what Sheena and Olivia presented today is the second page, right? So your PDSA cycle. And so, you can map it out and say, this is when we're going to do this is rapid cycle 1. We're going to begin it in November. And, you just kind of go down the line here, right, of your cycle. And so if you can plan it out, that's great. If you can, plan out the whole thing, that's awesome. If you can plan out parts of it and then you got to kind of see how it goes, that's okay too. Just this should hopefully help you walk through it with your team that you've been putting together, all those things. And so we really want you to use this for your presentation at the last session, where we'll, have as much of it filled out as you can. And if you do a PDSA cycle between now and then, that's awesome. Not required, but we can go over all those things at your presentation in that last session and in the session before that as well. So hopefully this just gets you started, gets you putting it down on paper, which I know everybody has kind of already been thinking about it. Hopefully this just helps for the presentation and doesn't feel like extra work. Is what we're really hoping for. Any questions on that? And that's in your email now, but it'll also come out in the recap. So don't worry about it if you don't have it open.